Don't you just hate this job? I hate cleaning up poop. Oh, here's one. Come take a look. There's one of my presents my dog left me. This little treasure is going to add nitrogen to the grass, right? And we talked about legumes adding nitrogen to the grass, but decomposition adds nitrogen to the grass. The fly that just laid their eggs on that fecal matter is going to dissolve this poop and return the nitrogen to the soil. Maybe you've noticed that where the dogs go, where they urinate and where they defecate, the grass grows greener. It's adding nitrogen to the soil. We talked about nitrogen being important not only for protein, but for DNA. Nothing can grow without nitrogen. Oh, here's another one. Something different this time. This is clover, and clover is a legume. Legumes have nitrogen-fixing bacteria on their roots, okay? Those nodules on their roots are going to take the nitrogen from the air and return it to the soil. And again, why do we need nitrogen? Is to make protein and DNA. Now, I wanted to show you my grass. It's looking a little dry right now. My grass doesn't get nitrogen, doesn't get artificial nitrogen, doesn't get watered. It just sits out here and does its thing. And this is a nice, healthy grass. Most people don't like grass like this because there's too much biodiversity, right? They don't like to see the clover. They don't like to see the dandelions and all these other weeds in there. What they want is a monoculture, just one species. Today's topic in BioBites, remember to comment, like, and subscribe, is going to be on biodiversity. And the opposite of biodiversity is a monoculture. We see it with corn, we see it with the trees we grow. We're only growing one species, and that's the way we like our lawns, which is bad for our lawns, bad for the environment. Come, let's take a look. So today's topics are going to be on the board over here. Yes, my whiteboard is in the yard all the time. For these biology bites, what we're talking about today is biodiversity, right? And it's just the amount of species, the amount of living things on Earth. And here's the cool part, you know, not everything's been discovered yet. We still discover thousands and thousands of organisms each year, sometimes even monkeys that we didn't know existed. So if you're thinking everything's discovered, it's not. And there is a guarantee here, if you do discover a new species, you have to name it after the person that taught you about biodiversity, which is me. We'll talk about scientific names later. So sometimes we just talk about the number of species in the world. We say that's biodiversity, but we also talk about genetic biodiversity. Genetic biodiversity is how much genes there are in a particular species, how many mutations there are. In humans, for example, our genetic diversity, we got tall, we got short, we got different colors, right? That's what we mean by genetic diversity in one species. Now, there's quite a few threats to biodiversity in our modern day times, and there's a little memory cue. I like all these different memory cues, but it spells hippo with 2 P's. And it stands for habitat loss, invasive species, pollution, population of humans, and overexploitation. Today, by the way, our film person is Savannah, my neighbor, and she's going to keep me warned on the time. How are we doing time-wise there?
We're at 3 minutes.
3 minutes. All right, good. Remember, we're going to get these BioBites under 10 minutes. So hold on to your hats. So in terms of a habitat loss, that's an easy one, right? We've built a lot of places up, right? We've taken all our strip malls and we've turned them into, we've taken all our woods and we've turned them into strip malls, right? Or where your house was used to be a grassland, right? That's what we mean by habitat loss. And we're going to use the F word here, I'm sorry. It's fragmentation, right? Which means we've created only little islands of biodiversity. You go to a forest preserve, it's just one little island of trees and plants, and that's it, right? And it's surrounded by roads. The smaller the island, the less biodiversity we're going to see. In terms of I, we're going to talk invasive species. One of those invasive species you'll see along in the wetlands is called purple loosestrife, which is on my shirt. And if I can get a hold of some of these beetles, we may raise some of these Galaricella beetles, not the right size, by the way, to eat the purple loosestrife. because the purple loosestrife is an invasive species. It takes over the area, it completely takes over the area, which decreases the biodiversity. We're also going to use the term exotic species, which means they're not native. They don't belong to this area, okay? And what they do is they tend to decrease the amount of biodiversity because, that, like I said, that's the only thing that'll grow. Pollution's pretty straightforward. We're going to specifically talk about eutrophication in this class, and I'll show you some examples later on. And what eutrophication is when the ponds, right about now, get all green and scummy. You're going to be making your little bottle ecology, and I'm going to give you some of that algae, and we're going to watch what happens in terms of eutrophication. Well, when there's too much nitrogen in the water, it tends to make the ponds very, very green. And at first, that's great, more photosynthesis, blah, blah, blah. But the problem is, over time, it chokes out the pond, it kills the pond. And that's what we mean by this eutrophication. Population of humans, as humans have increased in population, almost 8 billion now, we've seen a decrease in biodiversity. We're seeing more and more species go extinct. And then this overexploitation refers to overhunting. For example, fish. We need to be careful on what fish we eat. There's good fish, there's bad fish. I'm not talking in terms of health. What I'm talking about is in terms of environment. There are some fish that have been overexploited. They've been fished so much that there's not enough of them left. We got to take a break from those types of fish. I'll show you an app later on that you can tell whether or not you should order a fish, for example, at a restaurant. And what we mentioned already is this idea of a monoculture. My grass, although, yeah, it's mostly grass, I want all the different species in there, right? I want the bugs in there. We just saw a big grasshopper fly by, right? I don't want my grass just to be one type of species. I want biodiversity. I don't want monoculture, right? And in the past, we've seen this happen quite a bit where monocultures is a regular highway to one of these invasive species, right? If I only grow one type of plant and an invasive species starts to attack that plant, it's just one plant after the next that are going to be continually damaged. And I'm going to show you one here in just 1 second that hits really, really close to home. Thank goodness we don't do that anymore. Oh, but wait, corn, right, soybeans, we tend to just grow one big field of one plant. If an invasive species attacks that plant, we're going to be out of food, right? We need to get away from these ideas of monocultures. How are we doing on time, Savannah?
8 minutes.
Oh, great. I only got one more thing. This is perfect, all right? Last thing on here is what's happening when we see this biodiversity. The extreme of lack of biodiversity leads to extinction, right? Where a species no longer exists. And this extinction vortex is a good example of positive feedback. Positive feedback is when the stimulus and response go in the same direction. In other words, it's like a runaway train. And the fact of the matter is, as the number of species decrease, or number of individuals in a species decrease, it causes more of those organisms to go decrease. There's less genetic diversity, and so they're not very strong animals. And because there's no genetic diversity, they don't reproduce. And if they don't reproduce, they don't make offspring. It's a runaway train. That's what we mean by this extinction vortex, like a big spiral out of control. And a lot of our animals, even though there's some left, their genetic diversity, their amount of genes are so small. Remember, Scary says, I'm on the shallow end of the gene pool. All lions are, right? There's so few lions left, there's just not a lot of genetic diversity. One disease might wipe out all the lions. We're going to call those the walking dead. So anyway, I'm going to show you the one tree. This tree here is an ash tree. I don't know how well you can see it. I'm going to try to go in here a little bit. You don't have to, Savannah. But this ash tree here is a native tree, right? I think I asked you to do that on your scavenger hunt. And it's got those opposite leaves growth, and it's a native tree. It means it belongs here, right? But guess what? We planted ash trees on every single property. And now we got invasive species. It's called emerald ash borer. Emerald, like the color, ash, A-S-H, like the tree, and borer. It digs in and kills the tree. Thank goodness my ash tree's still alive, but if you look around this neighborhood, they had to cut them all down. Why? Because it was monoculture. We decided we'd grow only ash trees. How we doing on time?
10 minutes, 24.
Oh, we gotta quit. All right, last thing here. You see those little holes in the tree? Those little holes in the tree have a technical name. They're called ash holes. I'm Biology Bites. This is Roy Treveline. Like it, comment, subscribe.